They called it the largest hospitality sector drug network ever dismantled on American soil. 1,400 rooms, 43 properties, one criminal empire hiding in plain sight behind flickering vacancy signs, cheap Wi-Fi banners, and the smell of industrial bleach. And at the center of it all, one man, one company, and $4.8 billion in seized assets that federal prosecutors say represents just a fraction of what actually moved through those walls. Welcome to Operation Hollow Key. This is how deep it goes. And the next part is worse. At 3:47 in the morning, the streets of East Los Angeles were still. A light coastal fog had rolled in from the Pacific, blurring the orange glow of the highway signs along Interstate 10. The kind of quiet that feels deliberate, like the city itself was holding its breath. Then, from 6 different directions simultaneously, the silence broke. Over 300 FBI and ICE agents moving in coordinated strike teams hit 17 properties in a single breath. Not gang houses, not warehouses tucked behind razor wire. Motels. Budget motels. The kind of places where no one asks questions and no one remembers your face in the morning. Parking lots flanked by black SUVs, side exits sealed with armored units, rooftop positions locked down by DA's tactical personnel. The first breach came at the Valley Star Motel on South Alameda Street. Agents in black moved through the back corridor like shadows, flashbangs detonating in a controlled sequence down the hall, 3 seconds apart. Doors buckled, windows rattled. On the second floor, 2 Sinaloa cartel couriers tried to sprint toward a fire exit, dragging duffel bags packed with vacuum-sealed bricks of cocaine and fentanyl pills. Blue M30s stamped with the precision of a pharmaceutical line. They made it 4 steps. Agents had that exit sealed before the first flashbang hit. Inside room 214, federal forensic agents found something that no one had briefed on. The bed was folded against the wall on a motorized frame. The floor beneath it, a full chemical processing station. Ventilation hoses ran into the drop ceiling. Mixing equipment. Pill press machinery. Bulk fentanyl powder still in its raw form, packed in sealed drums labeled as industrial cleaning solution. 1 room. 1 drug super lab. And there were over 100 rooms just like it spread across 43 properties from Bakersfield to San Bernardino. By the time the sun cracked over the San Gabriel Mountains, federal agents had already seized 1.8 tons of methamphetamine, over 4 million fentanyl pills, 340 kilograms of cocaine, 180 kilograms of heroin, and more than $63 million in physical cash. Weapons caches turned up in maintenance rooms and behind false walls in utility closets, AR pattern rifles, suppressed pistols, and 2 military-grade explosive devices that immediately drew in the ATF. 3 encrypted server racks were pulled from what appeared to be a standard manager's office at a Burbank location. It was the server racks that cracked this entire case open. 72 hours later, deep inside a federal cyber forensics facility outside Quantico, analysts who had been working in rotating 8-hour shifts for 3 straight days finally broke the primary encryption layer on the seized drives. What they saw on those monitors stopped the room cold. They were not looking at a simple drug ledger. They were looking at a master logistics architecture, a full operational blueprint that agents would later call the most sophisticated domestic narco infrastructure ever documented on a federal server. The internal code name carved into the file directory header, Project Concierge. Project Concierge had a map, a live, dynamic map, and it showed the Sinaloa cartel's California operation not as a network of street corners and stash houses, but as a hospitality empire. Room numbers. Check-in schedules. Occupancy windows that corresponded to production cycles. Maintenance request logs that were actually coded supply delivery confirmations. The entire front end of a legitimate motel chain had been engineered, from the ground up, as a distribution and manufacturing system for the cartel. And the company behind it, Crossroad Hospitality Group, LLC, was owned entirely by one man. His name, in federal documents, is listed as Raymond Calloway Whitmore. 51 years old, executive chairman, and sole owner of Crossroad Hospitality Group. Philanthropist. Guest speaker at 3 separate California business summits in the past 2 years. His company managed 43 budget motel properties across the state, all under different brand umbrellas, all booked through a shared reservation system, all connected to the same back-end financial infrastructure. On paper, Crossroad Hospitality Group reported modest revenues from room rentals, event hosting, and property management contracts. In the encrypted files on those seized servers, the real revenue streams looked nothing like that. Investigators found 18 shell corporations nested inside each other across 6 countries: Panama, Cyprus, the Cayman Islands, the United Arab Emirates, Hong Kong, and Belize. Ghost logistics firms in Monterey and Kuliak listed as supplier vendors for Crossroad properties. Sham charitable foundations registered in California that funneled dark money through fake grant disbursements. A restaurant chain with 47 locations listed as a vendor for motel dining services. A restaurant chain that investigators determined had never served a single meal. It existed exclusively to launder cartel proceeds back into real estate acquisitions. One payment chain led analysts from a Crossroad hospitality account in Los Angeles to a shipping contractor in the port of Long Beach, to a freight logistics firm in Sinaloa, to a numbered account in Cyprus, and back clean into a construction company that had just won a state infrastructure contract worth $11 million. The money did not just move through these channels. It transformed. It emerged on the other side as legitimate capital, as jobs, as public works, as political donations. Because Raymond Whitmore did not just run a drug network, he ran a financial ecosystem. And federal prosecutors say that ecosystem was designed to be permanent. Inside his encrypted communications, cracked by FBI cyber analysts over 48 relentless hours, were direct message threads with 2 senior Sinaloa cartel logistics coordinators operating out of Culiacan, Sinaloa. Whitmore did not use cartel slang. He used hospitality industry language. A full house meant a production room had reached capacity and needed to be cleared. A maintenance request meant a drug shipment was inbound. Low occupancy meant a room was ready to receive a new lab setup. Every operational term was buried inside the perfectly mundane language of the hotel industry, designed to be invisible to any financial auditor or law enforcement analyst who did not have the full translation key. And then investigators found the political layer. Among the seized communications was a chain of encrypted messages between Whitmore and a man referenced only as the permit officer. Cross-referenced against financial transaction records and state lobbying filings, agents identified this individual as a senior planning and zoning official within the California state apparatus, a man with direct authority over commercial property licensing across 4 counties. His name in this narration is fictional. Call him Director Harold Fenwick. Fenwick had approved operating permits for 31 of Crossroads' 43 motel properties over a 4-year period. His approvals bypassed standard inspection cycles. His digital authorization signatures appeared in the Crossroads server files next to internal cartel logistics codes. In exchange, Fenwick received just over $4 million in payments routed through a sham consulting firm registered in Nevada under a different name entirely. This was not negligence. This was not bureaucratic oversight. This was engineered access. Raymond Whitmore had purchased a piece of California's regulatory infrastructure, and he had used it to build a drug fortress that looked, from the outside, exactly like the American economy. Investigators described what they were looking at as a command-level collusion between a private criminal operator, a Mexican drug cartel, and a corrupted state official. Not a handshake deal in a parking lot. A multi-year operational architecture with financial controls, contingency protocols, and a legal buffer system designed to withstand federal scrutiny indefinitely. The phrase one senior FBI official used in a closed briefing was this: "They did not infiltrate the system. They built a second system inside the first one." At 5:15 in the morning, 8 days after the initial raids, a federal command center in downtown Los Angeles activated the second phase of Operation Hollow Key. On a 40-foot digital display, red markers pulsed across the California map. 43 confirmed Crossroad hospitality properties, plus 19 associated distribution warehouses, 3 off-site server farms, 2 cartel communication hubs, and 1 private logistics terminal inside the port of Long Beach that had been moving narcotics under falsified freight manifests for over 2 years. Over 1,200 federal agents moved across the state simultaneously. FBI, ICE, DIA, DZ, SWAT teams from 6 field offices, ATF explosives units, 2 Black Hawk helicopters on rotational patrol over the I-5 corridor, Coast Guard assets positioned off the Long Beach terminal before dawn, At a warehouse facility in Fontana, agents breached the loading dock and discovered 47 sealed industrial pallets. The shipping manifests listed the contents as hospitality linen and cleaning supplies for Crossroad Properties. Inside the pallets, over 3 tons of methamphetamine packed into false bottom freight containers, wrapped in commercial laundry bags marked with the Crossroad Hospitality logo. Adjacent to the pallets, in a temperature-controlled room, agents found 1,100 kilograms of cocaine and a currency counting machine surrounded by rubber-banded stacks of $100 bills that took 3 hours to fully inventory. In the hills above Malibu, at a private residence registered under one of Whitmore's shell entities, ICE and FBI tactical units executed a simultaneous entry. Whitmore was not there. But his chief logistics coordinator, a Sinaloa cartel senior operative operating under a false identity, was apprehended attempting to destroy a laptop. The laptop survived. It contained the full operational calendar for Project Concierge, drug shipment windows, room rotation schedules, cartel contact codes, and a financial projection model that estimated the network's capacity to process over $200 million in drug revenue per month at full operational scale. $200 million per month through motel rooms. At the Port of Long Beach terminal, Coast Guard and ICE maritime units moved in before the morning shift. 4 shipping containers flagged through federal cross-referencing were opened on the dock under floodlights. 2 contained narcotics, cocaine and fentanyl precursor chemicals. 1 contained cartel communications hardware, encrypted radio transceivers, and satellite relay devices. The 4th contained something that made the senior agent on scene stop and call it in immediately. 11 human beings. Migrant smuggling. Alive, terrified, dehydrated. They had been locked inside a cargo container for what investigators estimated was 36 hours. Project Concierge had used the same logistics corridors for human trafficking that it used for narcotics shipments. By noon, the second phase had yielded 47 additional arrests. Among those taken into custody, 2 Port Authority officials who had been flagging specific containers as pre-cleared to bypass inspection, both on a monthly retainer from a Crossroads shell entity. A senior sergeant from a Southern California County Sheriff's Department whose patrol grid logs showed systematic gaps on nights when cartel convoys moved through his district. A state-licensed building inspector who had signed off on fraudulent renovation permits for 9 motel properties that were, at the time of inspection, actively operating as drug production facilities. When federal investigators pulled the internal communications between these officials and Crossroads' management layer, what they found was not a loosely connected web of small corruptions. It was a managed payroll system, a roster, a schedule. These were not officials who had been bribed once in a moment of weakness. They were employees. The Sinaloa cartel, operating through Raymond Whitmore's corporate structure, had built a second layer of law enforcement, one that worked for the cartel, not against it. A shadow infrastructure in uniform. Honest officers who worked alongside some of these men described it in the aftermath with the same word, betrayal. Men they had trusted with their backs in the field had been filing false reports, feeding raid schedules to cartel handlers, and clearing corridors for the very convoys their agencies were trying to intercept. One investigator, a 14-year ICE veteran, told colleagues in a closed debrief that it was like running a marathon and finding out that half the course had been rerouted while you slept. The badge, federal officials declared publicly, will be rebuilt from the ground up. And then there was the scale of the damage. Not to the cartel, to the communities, to the families. Because behind every processed kilo of fentanyl that moved through those 1,400 motel rooms, there was a street, a school, a neighborhood absorbing the impact. California's fentanyl overdose numbers had been rising for 3 consecutive years. The Sinaloa cartel's M30 pills, perfectly stamped, perfectly dosed to hook but not immediately kill, had flooded Los Angeles County, the Central Valley, and the Inland Empire. Emergency rooms in Compton, Fresno, and Riverside had been logging overdose clusters on a near-weekly basis. Children had found pills on sidewalks. Parents had been buried by their own kids. Entire zip codes had become narco-distribution zones without ever knowing what was operating inside the motel at the end of the block. Project Concierge had not been built in a vacuum. It had been built on silence, the silence of compromised officials, the silence of a regulatory system that approved permits without inspecting rooms, and the silence of a financial architecture so sophisticated that it looked, from the outside, like prosperity. Raymond Whitmore was taken into federal custody at an airport in the San Francisco Bay Area at 6:44 in the morning, preparing to board a private aircraft. He was wearing a suit. He was carrying a leather briefcase. He showed no visible reaction when agents surrounded him at the gate. The federal indictment against him runs to 41 counts: narcotics trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, racketeering, human trafficking, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy to operate a continuing criminal enterprise. If convicted on all counts, he faces life in federal prison. The total assets seized across both phases of Operation Hollow Key, $4.8 billion, the single largest asset seizure in the history of the FBI's Los Angeles Field Division. But here's what that number does not tell you. It does not tell you how many rooms in those 43 motels were never inspected before this operation began. It does not tell you how many convoys cleared falsified way stations on California highways over the past 4 years. It does not tell you how many permit approvals went through Director Fenwick's desk while his bank balance quietly grew in a Nevada holding account. And it does not tell you how long Project Concierge would have continued to operate if those encrypted server racks had been destroyed before agents reached them. Power, at its most dangerous, does not announce itself. It does not arrive with violence or flags or declarations. It arrives with a business license. A renovation permit. A vacancy sign lit up in the dark at 3 in the morning. It builds itself into the fabric of ordinary life until the ordinary life is the cover, and the operation underneath it is the reality. The Sinaloa cartel did not conquer California with guns. They did it with a spreadsheet, a shell company, and a man in a suit who knew exactly which doors to open and whose palm to press a check into. That is the warning inside this story. Not just about one motel chain, not just about one network, about what organized crime becomes when it stops looking like crime, when it buys its way into regulatory approval, into law enforcement rosters, into the hospitality industry, and into the daily backdrop of a city that never had reason to look twice at a motel with a lit vacancy sign. The real cost of this network is not counted in the $4.8 billion seized on federal manifest sheets. It is counted in the families that lost someone to a blue M30 pill, bought 2 blocks from a Crossroad hospitality property, in the migrants locked inside a shipping container for 36 hours on a Los Angeles dock, in the neighborhoods where the cartel's real estate investments had more civic presence than the county health department. Operation Hollow Key dismantled one network. But federal investigators are already running threads that lead to other states. Other properties, other corporate structures wearing the same costume of legitimate enterprise. If you are still watching this, tap like right now so this story reaches more people who need to understand what modern cartel infrastructure actually looks like. Drop the word exposed in the comments if you believe this kind of corruption should be dragged into the full light of public accountability.